Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for this webinar celebrating 5 years of Clean Slate in Michigan. My name is Cassie Lawyer, and I am the Policy and Research Specialist for Safe and Just Michigan. Safe and Just is a legislative policy advocacy organization working on criminal legal issues, and we are based in Lansing, Michigan. To kick things off, I would like to say that approximately 1.3 million Michiganders have had their records partially or totally expunged by Auto Clean Slate. Now, Automatic Clean Slate is only a part of the legislation, but still, 1.3 million people have had their lives transformed by this piece of legislation. This is an amazing number, but with every endeavor, there are lessons and opportunities for improvement. We have an amazing panel here this afternoon, to talk about it. And our hope is that today, in addition to a well-deserved victory lap, that we learn what those lessons are and what might be next for Clean Slate. These issues are all outlined in our latest report, Clean Slate Turns 5, Clean Slate 2.0, and What Comes Next, which is available on our website. If you have any questions for our panelists, please drop them in the chat so that I may be able to ask them later in the webinar. Please be reminded that the questions we want to look at sort of broad policy implication questions and not questions on individual expungement cases. If you want some additional information about that, please consult the chat where we have resources where you can be connected to and talk to somebody with regards to your own particular case. With me this afternoon is Stephanie LaBelle. Stephanie is the Executive Director of Project Clean Slate in Detroit. Project Clean Slate is an initiative in the city of Detroit that provides legal services to city residents as they navigate the expungement process. Welcome, Stephanie. It's good to have you. Also, we have Sarah Monroe. Sarah is the Director of the Pro Bono Services at Michigan Advocacy Program, also known as MAP. MAP's goal is to increase access to the judicial system by providing direct legal services, education, and advocacy. It is good to see you again, Sarah. And finally, we have our own Kamau Sandiford. Kamau is the program manager for our own Clean Slate initiative. He provides technical support, coordination, and is our resident expert on all things Clean Slate. Thank you so much, Kamau. The first thing I want to do is some level setting, because to truly appreciate how monumental the Clean Slate legislation was, we need to remember what the expungement process was like before the legislation passed. Sarah, could you briefly tell us about what expungements were like prior to April of 2021?
Sure. They were few and far between. We did not do very many of them, even though we're a legal services office that serves 13 counties in Michigan, because whenever someone came to us who needed an expungement, they were not eligible because our laws were so restrictive. So it was very few people who met the very high standard that the law prior to the Clean Slate Act required to be eligible to even apply for an expungement.
Thank you so much. Stephanie, some of the folks have described having a criminal record as being perpetually punished. Can you talk to us a little bit about what the barriers residents of Detroit with a criminal record faced in daily life?
Yeah, I would be happy to. You know, barriers from a criminal conviction last far beyond the sentencing. One of the biggest challenges for people is employment. Many employers conduct background checks, and unfortunately, several employers don't hire people who have a criminal conviction. And even when somebody's qualified for the position, the stigma attached to a record really limits opportunities, especially in fields like healthcare, education, and finance. Another barrier that we see a lot of is housing. Landlords screen applications, and we have a lot of our clients. The reason that they come to us and they sign up for expungement is because they're trying to get into more stable housing. And unfortunately, they're often denied due to their record. Access to education is something that's also affected by criminal convictions. And then something that maybe isn't talked about a lot is the social stigma. So it might not be affecting somebody with regards to their employment or education, but they carry this weight with them, often for something that happened 20, 30 years ago. Sometimes they feel judgment or, they're excluded from things in their communities. We have clients who can't volunteer for field trips at their children's schools because of these convictions. And so, the new legislation was really critical, and it really has helped so many thousands of people remove some of those barriers.
Sarah, are these some of the same issues that you've seen in your own clients?
Yes, absolutely. I think everything that Stephanie mentioned resonates with our client population as well. I think we don't realize how much when with the employment aspect, a record can affect someone's ability to be fully employed. So we see a lot of clients, cobbling together a bunch of part-time jobs because that's the best they can get, but they might have the experience and the credentials to do something bigger. Their criminal record holds them back. So to become fully employed at the level that a person is able to, it seems that this can really affect their lives. I also think like that there have been, because of policing and just pretty robust prosecution system in our state, I think there are entire communities that kind of have been held back, especially economically, based on criminal records and the collateral consequences that they cause in people's lives. It affects a person more than just individually, but it can affect their family and even greater their community.
Thank you so much for that. And this all speaks to the need for this legislation. Now, when Clean Slate was passed, it immediately expanded the eligibility for the expungement petition process. Kamal, often I've heard you mention how grateful you are to our legal service providers, partners, and volunteers um, in implementing this portion of the legislation. Why is it important to have these kinds of partnerships?
Yeah, certainly. So from an organization standpoint, we're limited in terms of what we're able to do because we're not a legal service provider like Project Clean Slate or MAP or Lakeshore Legal Aid or Legal Aid of West Michigan. So at these fairs, yes, we can start people or we can initiate the process, get them on that path towards getting an expungement, but ultimately there's a lot more that goes into it after the fair has concluded. As Sarah and Stephanie can attest to, there is requesting court files, there is, you know, submitting paperwork to the court. There is representing that person at court at that hearing. There are issues that come along the way that may not have been anticipated in the initial phases of the screening process. And that's where lawyers, legal service providers like Project Clean Slate and MAP come into play, and they play a crucial role in terms of making sure that that person finishes what they started, which is getting the conviction removed from their record.
Thank you so much for that. Now, all of you have had firsthand experience with the implementation of the expanded petition process. And Kamal, you just mentioned that there are issues that come up during the petition process. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Stephanie, can you tell us what problems you have observed during the implementation of the expanded petition process?
Sure. It did open the door to thousands of people to clear their records, but of course it came with challenges. Initially, one of the biggest challenges for us was court backlogs. So, you know, all of a sudden, 5 years ago, thousands of people wanted to get their expungements. And so part of that process is requesting their certified records from the court, paying for them, having the court mail them, or they have to go pick them up. And so the staffing at the court did not allow for that to happen in a timely fashion. It took several weeks, months, and in some cases years for the courts to become fully staffed and come up with a process whereby they could provide those records in a timely manner. Another big issue was confusion or maybe lack of awareness. So people thought because there was now automatic expungement that they didn't need a petition expungement at all, and all of their convictions were gone, which was not true. Some people who tried filing on their own, they didn't know the process steps. And so it's a big, long process. And if you're not familiar with it, it's easy to miss a step. And so courts were having to reject filings so that people could correct their pleadings. Another issue that we worked with, and I'm sure Sarah encountered this as well. In fact, I know she has. The judges weren't really up to date on the new legislation and the interpretation of it. And so we actually communicated with several courts and did some presentations for them because the judges weren't sure how to apply the new law. And we wanted to, make sure that everybody was getting a fair chance at this. So that as time has gone on, that problem has gotten better. There's still some things that, we're appealing, Sarah's appealing, because we do think that courts are still misinterpreting some aspects of the legislation. And then, another major issue is costs. There are fees from courts to buy the records. There's a Michigan State Police fingerprinting fee. And then oftentimes clients owe the courts costs and fees or restitution. And that has made several judges reluctant, I should say, to grant an application if that person still owes the court or the complainant in the case money.
Okay. Wow. So you touched on something. So there's two main parts to the legislation. There is the expungement petition process, and then there's the automatic expungement process. And like you said, Stephanie, there was this idea that once automatic expungement came online, that the petition process would no longer be important. Kamal, why is the petition process, with its partnerships and expungement fairs, still important? What are example of some of the complexities of a case that would make the petition process relevant?
Yeah, I think the main thing to keep in mind is that the petition process is still broader in scope as opposed to the automated process. So the automated process is specifically targeted at low-level offenses. The example that I use is, a retail fraud third degree or driving while license suspended. Those types of low-level offenses are generally eligible for automatic expungement, whereas the more serious offenses, assaultive offenses, crimes of dishonesty, you require that additional step of petitioning the court. And again, the idea is that before they expunge those types of offenses, they want some type of judicial review or oversight over it before they make that step in terms of expunging that offense. So certainly the petition process is still needed because there are a number of offenses that aren't necessarily eligible for automatic expungement. Additionally, there is a shorter wait period with petitions. So the example that I use again is, you can potentially expunge a retail fraud third degree after 3 years through the petition process, as opposed to waiting 7 years with the automated process. And as both of our panelists have alluded to, the barriers that are created with a conviction are such that, the person generally wants to get that taken care of as soon as possible. And that's where these legal service providers come into play, because they can then assist that person in petitioning and getting that conviction removed at a faster rate. And that's why it's so important to still have the petition process and to still have providers working to help people in that arena.
I appreciate it. So, thank you for that. The automatic expungement process was launched in April of 2023, just like the expanded petition process. There were issues and problems that came up during its implementation. Sarah, if we could start with you, what issues did you see arise from the automatic expungement process?
Yeah, I think one huge issue that is not a new issue, it's been around since the implementation in 2023, is the fact that people who aren't checking their iChat don't know that they've had a conviction automatically expunged. So people come out, and Stephanie, I'm sure, can attest to this, come to fairs saying, I need an expungement, and we run their iChats and their convictions have already been automatically expunged. Meanwhile, they're checking the box on job application and housing application and disclosing things that as a state, we do not believe are convictions anymore because they've been expunged. So that is a huge problem and remains so. And as far as I know, there hasn't really been much done around that, other than, the advocacy groups helping people look at their records. But that requires a person coming to us out of their own kind of volition and, investigating. So I have big concerns around all these people who don't know that their records have been expunged. And then going through kind of the automatic expungement kind of process and the things. There was a lot of back and forth initially. I'm happy to say Michigan State Police, who was in charge of kind of handling the automatic expungement, was very open to working with the advocates around issues that we saw. So a lot of the issues I think that we initially saw have been resolved. There are still some issues, like if someone has maybe a hanging charge, like they were charged with something by a district attorney, but the court didn't notify MSP as to how that case resolved. That might prevent an automatic expungement from happening. And there's kind of some little nuances with people's records like that are still things that require work on our end to kind of resolve to make sure the person's iChat is correct so that the automatic expungement process can work the way it's supposed to. Stephanie, I'm sure you have some that you could add as well.
Yeah, I actually we experience everything Sarah just said. And, we also see issues where the Michigan State Police may have automatically expunged something that was eligible. And for whatever reason, the court did not seal their record. And so we were able to look up a register of actions for a case, and it's still public on the court's website. And so one situation is they've left it up entirely. Another problem that we're seeing is the court may remove the actual expunged conviction from the register of actions, but there are still docket entries relating to that expunged conviction. So it might show the plea, it might show the sentence. It's terrible. So once we started checking those as well, we had to add a whole nother part to our process, whereby in addition to making sure it's been sealed off the iChat, that the court was also sealing it in a proper manner. And so we've worked with several courts, the state court administrator's office when we were unable to resolve it with the courts, and the Michigan State Police. They've really been a great partner with this. They, they're really receptive to, changing things that need to be changed, and correcting things, when they need that. But there's still a lot of challenges with the automatic expungement in Michigan.
Mal, what have you observed?
Yeah, well, so I think like a general issue seems to be that there isn't a formal process through which a legal service provider can appeal a decision necessarily that they believe, an offense should have been expunged that hasn't been expunged for whatever reason. Fortunately, as Stephanie and Sarah mentioned, MSB has certainly been receptive to some of our concerns, and we've been able to troubleshoot some issues in that area. One of the issues that was actually brought to our attention, I believe by Stephanie's group, was the issue of 92-day or less misdemeanors not being expunged through the local courts. So for some perspective, yes, you have the automated expungement process. Most offenses are initiated by the state police, and most auto expungements are initiated by the state police, but there is a subset of convictions that are initiated by the local courts. Those are the 92-day or less misdemeanor offenses. They tend to be low-level offenses like ordinance violations. And there's been an issue there, and I know Stephanie, you can attest to this issue because you're the one that brought it to our attention as far as the local courts not necessarily being on the same page when in terms of auto expunging those offenses.
Yeah, we do see a lot of that, and sometimes it's a mapping error. So the courts that use the JIS system, which is, a majority of the district courts in the state, sometimes there's a mapping issue. If they have like a new ordinance and SCAO doesn't have that in their system, it might not be automatically expunged because of that. Sometimes the courts are using a different code, and so they might report something to Michigan State Police about a conviction, and they're using a state statute, that an MCL code, and in reality, the court has its own ordinance number for something that is 92 days or less, and should be coming off. But then we have to kind of connect the court and the Michigan State Police so that the court can provide the Michigan State Police with the proper information, and they can adjust the iChat. And after we do that, we typically see the offense fall off, and then the court seals the ROA. But there are still, we're working on several issues with several courts in regard to this.
And it all takes, oh, sorry, Cassie, it all takes so much like human power to do, like, it's just all, so I think something that Steph and I were talking before we went live was how there was funding for programs around expungement before automatic expungement started. And I think there's a misconception now that, oh, everyone's convictions are being auto expunged, so we don't really, this isn't an area of particular need. Well, we need people to work on these issues for, I mean, sometimes a single client will require, filing petitions, communicating with MSP, communicating with the courts. So it is just very labor intensive. So I think that's one of the bigger problems with automatic expungement is a misconception that everyone's convictions are being set aside that way.
Wow, I am getting sort of a greater sense and a greater appreciation of the person time that's involved in this process. I would like to say there is a couple of terms that were unfamiliar to me when I was reading the report, and one of which is sort of intervening conviction. And I was wanting to know if one of you, any of you, could talk about what an intervening conviction is and how it affects the expungement process.
Sure.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Kamal. Sorry.
no,
Okay. So something that was added to the expungement legislation that went into effect in 2021, and it also affects automatic, is this concept of an intervening conviction or a conviction that falls in the waiting period of another conviction. So each conviction in Michigan is eligible, if it's eligible for expungement, has a waiting period. And the waiting period is calculated based on the last thing that happened in your case. So whether the last thing was your discharge from probation, you were released from parole, maybe you served time in jail and that was it. And the waiting period starts to run on that date. And depending on the offense, your waiting period is either 3, 5, or 7 years. If you have another conviction in that waiting period, so say you're within your 5-year waiting period, you had a driving on a suspended license conviction, you will not be eligible to expunge the conviction with that 5-year waiting period that you're trying to expunge until that intervening conviction can be expunged. And so practically speaking, what this has done, for Project Clean Slate anyway, we have clients who come to us with several convictions because now an unlimited number of misdemeanors can be expunged if you have no more than 3 felonies, with exceptions and exclusions. And so we've been forced to file things in a staggered manner. And so somebody might have 4 convictions that are all about 2 years apart, but we have to do them one at a time, even if they're all, 30 to 40 years old. We have to file them in a way that the intervening conviction is expunged, then we can go back. And so we kind of work our way backwards. There are ways that we can file them maybe at the same time because that reduces our fees. So when we file an application, there's a $50 fee that Michigan State Police charges to run the fingerprints and provide the criminal history report and the FBI report. If we file 10 applications for one person at one time, it's only $50. But if we have to file them in a staggered manner, we have to pay $50 every time we file. And that would be true for somebody, just doing it on their own. So sometimes we're able to file it, and depending on the court, we can kind of arrange the hearing dates in a way that would make sense for our clients so that we can kind of expunge them in a staggered order. There are some courts who will restart that waiting period. And so we've convinced several jurisdictions that if the waiting period, if you restart the waiting period at the time of the intervening conviction, then that person should be eligible. So there are many judges and courts who have adopted this and are doing it, and there are several who don't think that is the correct interpretation of the law. And so it's slowed us down, and we really pride ourselves on being fast and helping as many people expunge their convictions as we can. But this is something that we're still trying to get changed in the legislation, especially as it relates to automatic, because the Michigan State Police will not automatically expunge something if that conviction has another conviction in its waiting period. And if that intervening conviction is not eligible because it's something that will never be eligible, you're out of luck regarding getting an automatic expungement of the conviction you're trying to have expunged. So we're still doing a lot of work on that topic as well.
Yes, another term that came up in the report that I was unfamiliar with is a non-conviction. And so, Sarah, could you talk a little bit about what non-convictions are?
Sure. So non-conviction is kind of exactly how it sounds, something that is on someone's record, but that they didn't ultimately get convicted of. So, for example, someone whose case was dismissed during the proceedings. The prosecutor chose not to go forward. There's a fancy Latin term for that. We call it nolle pros, but it's basically another form of dismissal. Someone who was acquitted, they got a not guilty verdict. That's a non-conviction. Am I missing any? So those are kind of the categories that we consider non-convictions. And the issue that we see around these, they usually aren't included on a person's iChat, but they do remain in Michigan on online court dockets. So things that, your neighbors were never convicted of linger forever on online court dockets, and there's no vehicle in which they can get those sealed. So I find this to be a kind of extraordinary reality for people who call us and are like, I have this case that I was not convicted of, but my employer found it because they Googled my name and they saw it on an online court docket that I was charged with this. And now they're asking me all these questions. There's no way for people to get rid of those. So someone who would have, pled guilty to something, someone who actually did something and pled guilty to it, and took responsibility for it, has a vehicle provided it's eligible, to expunge that from their record with no record, expunge that from their criminal history, and there'll be no public record of that. However, someone who's not convicted of something, someone who's acquitted of something, someone who's innocent has that hanging over them for the rest of their lives. It's kind of mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. Stephanie, can you talk a little bit about, what are the consequences of these, you know, charges that just go nowhere?
It's unfortunate because those people are still facing the barriers that expungement is here to remove. And so it affects not only petition expungement, it also affects automatic expungement. There are even situations where somebody may have had a sentence under 7411 or HIDA, and the court didn't tell the Michigan State Police that the case is now closed and done. And so we look at an iChat, not seeing that case at all. And a client who should be eligible for automatic expungement is not. And MSP replies to us, they have a standard form response that they say, if your client has ever been charged or arrested for something that's not on the iChat, including 7411, HIDA, et cetera, they may not be eligible for auto set aside. So then what we're forced to do is trying to ask the client to remember, often decades ago, where this charge could have been. Then we're trying to work with the court to have the court send that disposition information to the Michigan State Police, because as long as that is there, they think it's pending, and that client is precluded from automatic expungement entirely. So it's not until we can get that updated, then we can ask the Michigan State Police to rerun the iChat, and oftentimes they're then eligible. And that's not something somebody would ever realize because it's not showing on their iChat. But the Michigan State Police think it's still like this pending HIDA or, diversion or whatever it may be. So that's been a big problem for our clients.
Wow, there's a lot of technical legal issues that have come up in the implementation of Clean Slate. Can you tell me what, all of you, what's sort of being done to address them? Kamal, let's start with you.
Yeah, so fortunately, we've kind of formed this informal expungement work group. It comprises of various legal service providers across the state: Project Clean Slate, Lakeshore Legal Aid, MAP, Legal Aid of West Michigan. They're all at the forefront of this type of work that we're doing. And one of the things to keep in mind is that this is a relatively new statute, so it's only 5 years old. And with that, there are going to be issues of statutory interpretation that come into play. And there are cases that are making its way through the legal system that will ultimately become case law for decades to come. And we're not quite there yet, but we will get to a point, hopefully, knock on wood, where we'll have some type of established law that everyone can adhere to. But until that time comes, we run into this situation, which Stephanie and Sarah alluded to earlier, which is where, some counties interpret the statute one way, another county interprets it another way. And so it's been extremely beneficial to kind of brainstorm with other legal service providers, evaluate cases, determining which cases are warrant further litigation. Hopefully it's something that we can continue to do in the future.
Sarah, what about you? Can you talk a little bit about some of the cases that might be making its way through the
Sure.
courts?
Yeah, I think in some instances with a new law, like Kamau mentioned, a judicial remedy is kind of in order. So we need a higher court to define aspects of the statute that might be opaque or might be interpreted differently. We call it justice by jurisdiction sometimes, where, one court is more than happy to grant expungements and looks at the law in a very expansive way, whereas another court is very narrow in how they might read, for example, intervening convictions. And so in some cases, the best kind of remedy, though it takes a long time because appeals are slow, is appealing to higher courts so that higher courts can kind of define different aspects of the law. I can think of a case that made its way to the Michigan Supreme Court that our committee actually submitted an amicus brief in, which is us saying how, a ruling would affect our clients and, giving the court our opinion, should they be interested in how we think they should rule. But that the court helped shine a light on one of the criteria for a petition-based expungement, which is public interest and what that means. The Supreme Court did. And that's kind of an example of a judicial remedy where we see some judges interpreting public interest very narrowly. We see others interpret it broadly. And then eventually we say, hey, higher court, can you help us all understand how we all should be interpreting this so that our clients in Detroit have the same experience as our clients in the UP?
So that's one remedy, is sort of the judicial remedy. Sarah or Kamau, can one of you talk about sort of what other types of remedies we can have with regards to the technical issues that have come up?
Yeah, so as an organization, we've attempted some legislative fixes to the statute. I think Stephanie, you may have mentioned this earlier, the issue of intervening convictions and the impact that those convictions can have on a person's eligibility, specifically automatic expungement. We advocated for the passage of 2 bills in 2024 that would have removed the intervening conviction rule. Unfortunately, those bills didn't really get to where they needed to get to. There wasn't a vote taken on those bills. So it's certainly something that we hope to revisit moving forward. As far as the non-conviction issue is concerned, something to keep in mind is that I think there are 13 or 14 clean slate states. Most of those states have some version of a non-conviction expungement mechanism, but Michigan is one of the few states that doesn't have a pathway that allows you to expunge non-convictions. And so that's certainly something that we hope to rectify through legislation moving forward as well.
Okay, before we get to audience questions, I would, and this is for everyone, can you talk about what things you would like to see in the future of Clean Slate? Stephanie, let's start with you.
I have, how much time do you have? What I really would like is for some consistency. I think that it's been enough time that this law has been in effect, that judges and courts and former defendants should have a better idea of how things are going to go. And right now, there's just so much variance between, as Kamal mentioned, in the different counties, in the different courts. And it really seems unfair to me. Somebody who lives in a different county shouldn't get a different outcome when they're in the same situation, just because um, of the way somebody feels about expungement. So I think consistency both in petition expungement and then automatic expungement. I think that we probably need to have some statewide court training, maybe by the state court administrator's office, so that we are not trying to address all of these issues piecemeal. Because while we're addressing them for our clients, there are, thousands of people in the state who maybe are trying to navigate this on their own, and they don't have, the knowledge or the team behind them to make all this happen. Sarah talked about, spending hours and hours on a case. We have 4,000 open files and we have fewer than 20 people on our team. So they're not all in that situation, but those that are, I mean, it really does take a lot of work on our end. And while our clients are lucky that we do that for them, there are people who don't have, organizations like Sarah's and Safe and Just and Project Clean Slate behind them to do that for them. And so, I would just like to see a more consistency.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, I would like to see continue address the funding problem that we have, because I think the petition process is pretty burdensome, and I think frankly pretty difficult for non-attorneys to navigate on their own. Both Stephanie and I rely on federal funding, and it's most news is not good news these days when it comes to federal funding. So I would love to see some, local funding to kind of support the work we do. I agree with everything that Stephanie said about consistency. I also think the petition process could probably be easier. Right now, the service, one of the things that trips people up is the service requirements. Certain documents are served on 4 different entities, and certain documents need to be certified, and some need to be on certain cards. And so I think there probably is ways to make the petition process a little bit easier, but that's not the area that I work in. I work in the actual delivering the legal services. So from our perspective, the more, funding that we have around this issue, the more people we can help get expungements and really change the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives.
Kamal, what about you?
So I know as an organization, we certainly want to see the implementation of a clean slate portal, which I think Sarah mentioned earlier. Obviously, you run into a situation where people are having convictions removed from their record, and they don't necessarily know that it's been removed, and they're still checking that box, which seems to be, counterproductive, right? So certainly that's something that we want to see happen. Additionally, as we mentioned earlier, the issue of non-convictions is still an issue. The idea that you can expunge, it's easier to expunge a conviction as opposed to an offense that you weren't even convicted of, seems to be problematic, or it doesn't make sense, right? So certainly that's something that we want to see rectified moving forward as well.
Thank you so much. There is no questions in the chat, so I'll ask you all one of my own. And that is with regards to universal case management system, because that's not something that we have in Michigan, but we are the judiciary is something that's working on. How would that affect the expungement process, um, automatic and petition based, um, if we had everybody on a universal case management system?
Yeah, I think that, the state court administrator's office is moving toward that, and that really will be life-changing. Right now, if a client thinks they have a conviction that's not on their iChat, we can go to several court websites, and search for them. But if we had one system where we could plug someone's name in and it would return all of the results, that would really be huge. Sometimes clients forget about convictions. They're so minor, or they're so old. And if for whatever reason they weren't reported on their iChat, which happens a lot, quite frankly, we don't have any way of knowing about it. And so that's something that that would really, when I say life-changing, for the attorneys and the people practicing in this arena, it really would be.
And I'll also say, I think a unified case management system would potentially open the door for an online petition process as well, where instead of mailing stuff or off, maybe we can file stuff online, or maybe that's wishful thinking. But that's certainly something that I hope that we'd see maybe 5, 10 years from now. I look at we don't do it as much, but we do some license restoration clinics with the Secretary of State, and they have a mechanism in place where people can petition for restoration of their license through, there's an online process there. So just an idea.
Okay. Um, any final thoughts before we end this webinar?
Thank you for having us. This is really important, and the work that Safe and Just does, for the whole communities across the state. It's so important, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I echo Stephanie's sentiment. We, when the Clean Slate Act started, tried to host our own expungement fairs, and we have a very small staff of 2 attorneys and 1 paralegal, and they take so much work that we have now pivoted to just partnering with Safe and Just, and they're very well-run expungement fairs, and it's where we meet so many of our clients, and we're so grateful to the work that Safe and Just has done for the fairs and all the other work around expungement that they do.
And both of these ladies know how grateful I am for their support over the years. So thank you guys.
Yeah, and I have actually been to a couple of expungement fairs to help out, and I just wanted to thank all of you who are really in the weeds and helping folks individually get their records expunged. Again, this piece of legislation was absolutely transformative in the lives of the people who were able to have their records either partially or fully expunged. All of the solutions and the both the legislative remedies and the judicial remedies all would further to make this piece of legislation much more effective, um, and assure that everybody who has had um, everyone who's had trouble in the past and have gotten over that can really sort of put that behind them. With that, we have come to the end of this webinar. I would like to thank our panelists for a great discussion, and to you, our audience, for your attention. To learn more about what's next for Clean Slate in Michigan, please refer to our latest report, Clean Slate Turns 5, Clean Slate 2.0 and What Comes Next, that's available on the Safe and Just Michigan website. And with that, thank you all so much for participating, and you have a wonderful rest of the day.